I'd like to introduce Graeme Gilloch, who is a professor at the University of Lancaster, author of several books, and for us, the most important of these is Myth, Metropolis, Walter Benjamin and the City. Really the first real serious attempt to look at Benjamin's writings in terms of this overriding theme of the city. And that goes back to what year? 1996.
96, yeah.
Yes, so that is quite a long time ago. He is a world authority on Benjamin. I think everybody will agree. He has also published extensively on related subjects. Krakauer has a book on Krakauer, Critical Our Companion in Misfortune, Siegfried Krakauer. And is also involved in various projects, cultural projects relating to cinema, contemporary art. So I'm very glad to welcome Graeme and look forward to your keynote presentation that will conclude and maybe hopefully sum up some of the points that we have made in this meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Libero. Thank you, Nadia, for inviting me to be here. It's a great pleasure. It's a great honor to be here. I'd like to thank Georgia Tech for hosting this event. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. And it's hopefully this will be interesting for you. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So thank you for listening. Back again. Right, thank you. I'm going to start off with this little kind of watchword from André Breton. Who am I? If I am this once, I would reply in a proverb, then perhaps everything would amount to knowing whom I haunt. So I'm going to take that as a kind of point of departure. I'm going to read. Hopefully it's going to make sense. I come with news of my adopted and beloved city of Manchester. Manchester not by the sea, that is. Rightly or wrongly, Manchester is not renowned for its architectural beauty. So it is probably newsworthy when, in an interview with the BBC, Historic England North West expressed their deep misgivings about a proposed new development, one that threatens to, quote, erase different layers of this area's history, unquote, and requires the demolition of various buildings, quote, that have soul and tell important stories about our city's past. What they're objecting to are newly unveiled plans for the construction of these twin skyscrapers, or what passes for skyscrapers in Manchester. There'll be little things in Atlanta. Number 1 and number 2, St Michael's, pair of matching towers in a redevelopment scheme proposed by a consortium fronted by 2 former Manchester United players, of all things. Football players, that's soccer players to you. Ryan Giggs here, and a local lad, Gary Neville, on the right as we look at them. But we should perhaps be loath to complain. These are, after all, intended as benign structures, catering precisely to the pressing problems of the local urban community and addressing Manchester's post-industrial problems. In addition to the 1,000 jobs created, the buildings will provide inexpensive social housing for at least 200 needy individuals. There will be dedicated centres for the homeless, for refugees, for survivors of domestic violence, and for the rehabilitation of those with addiction problems and ex-offenders. There will be extensive purpose-built sheltered residences for semi-independent living, for the aged and the disabled. On other levels, studios and workshop spaces are to be offered at minimum rates for local artists, artisans and apprentices. There'll be sports and leisure facilities for local teenagers. There'll be a free drop-in legal centre. The whole will be carbon neutral and built primarily using recycled and environmentally friendly materials. And so these edifices will be models of a distinctive kind of 21st century open public space, a fresh vision of civic architecture underwritten by the new post-industrial philanthropists, veritable vertical phalanx stairs of community and cooperation. There will even be a synagogue replacing the one they have to knock down to clear the site. Okay, it's only the 31st of March, April Fool's is tomorrow. I'm getting in early. The scheme includes 200 beds. The true part is the synagogue and the 1,000 jobs. The rest of it was nonsense. Forget Fourier, right? The scheme includes 200-bed five-star hotel, 153 apartments, da-da-da-da-da-da. It tells you there are 2 sky bars, more office space, etc., 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 etc. This is just what we need in Manchester. 2 more monumental skyscrapers. To me, these edifices look like blackened lungs at the heart of the city. Forget Fourier then. But it does lead me to the 3 themes that I actually want to pick up on. That's the end of them, St Michael's 1 and 2. I'll come back to them a little bit. Hopefully it will be the end of them. But the whole debate raises 3 things that I am interested in. The first of these is the notion of the proliferation of placelessness. These skyscrapers epitomise the kind of architectural structures that the French social anthropologist Marc Augé famously characterised as non-lieux or non-places. And it's the notion of non-lieux that I want to talk about. Secondly, there's the importance of the past and its relationship to and construction by the present. The notion of non-lieu finds a kind of counterpart in the notion of lieu de mémoire. You have to excuse my French pronunciation, it's terrible. Lieu de mémoire, sites of memory, a term coined by Augé's compatriot, the historian Pierre Nora, in his 7-volume magnum opus, tracing the formation of what he terms French memory history, formation of the collective conscience. And finally, there is historic England's intervention and concern about the notion of a lost urban soul. I'm going to pick up and try and play with this idea of lost souls in the city. Lost souls, not in the sense that they're using it, but rather lost souls as a kind of wandering, haunting presence within the city. What kind of haunting might this be? How might a gathering of lost souls, ghosts of a particular kind, disturb the best laid plans of mice and men, or here, financiers and footballers, even of architects and academics? And my purpose then is threefold. I want to posit an elective affinity rather than an antagonism between non-lieu and lieu de mémoire. They are really 2 sides of the same coin. I want to reconfigure the notion of phantasmagoria, that gathering of ghosts in the marketplace, acknowledging, on the one hand, its customary identification with forms of deception, duplicity, domination, etc., etc., but then also suggesting its potential as a critical trope and imperative. And in my advocacy of ghosts and eulogy to their haunts, and I take the term eulogy from Augé, it's a term actually, eulogy is a very interesting term. My French is so poor, I misread it as elegy, first of all. And I think this, in actual fact, this is a rather profitable mistake in a way, because his works are both eulogies and elegies at the same time. But as an elegy to his haunts, I want to make a special plea for particular kinds of kindred spirits. Not the quiet, sad ones, those melancholy shades denied rest and peace, but rather noisy ghosts, rowdy ghosts, unruly troublemakers, poltergeists, the ones who would deny us rest and peace. So I want to offer an idea, which is probably a terrible idea, and I'm going to offer it to you anyway, of phantasmagoria as a gathering of poltergeists in the marketplace, and suggest to you that perhaps this is what the 21st century desperately needs. Not non-lieux, not lieu de mémoire, but lieu d'entrée, or more simply, haunts. Haunts being both a place and an activity. So let us begin with Marc Augé and the concept of non-places, which is probably familiar to many of you. The notion of non-places is in many ways Marc Augé's kind of key concept and insight into sort of 21st century urbanism. His argument is that life in what he calls supermodernity is increasingly spent in settings that are bereft of those meanings and memories that have hitherto imbued and defined our habitats and environments. Traditional anthropological notions of place refer to a locus which is recognisable as possessing three characteristics. He says places of identity, of social and interpersonal relations, and of history. So non-places are logically the very antithesis of this and come in a variety of guises which we're probably familiar with. So the classic one being this: airports, for instance. Airports, shopping malls, hyper and supermarkets, motorway service stations. You might call them freeway rest stops, or something like that. Isn't it? Oscar Wilde said, the English and the Americans have everything in common but language, which I kind of encounter most days here. International hotel chains, multiplex cinemas, identikit fast food coffee shop franchises, glass box office complexes with their ground floor atria bedecked by potted plants and palms. I've seen quite a few of those in Atlanta. And here we have a selection of airports, which I'm sure we all recognise where these are. Exactly. No points for guessing which one of these is Atlanta, which one of these is Manchester, which one of these is Shanghai, which one of these is Dubai. I'm not awarding any points. In fact, I've forgotten myself, actually. That's Atlanta, that's Manchester, this is Shanghai, that's Dubai. You knew that, didn't you? Shopping malls, another one of non-places. Again, this is a fairly random selection. I'm sure, again, we all recognise these. The Mall of America, one in Egypt, one in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and the other, the Trafford Centre in Manchester. Yeah, okay. So this is Manchester, you can tell by the potted plants. That's the Mall of America. This is exactly Malaysia, and this is Egypt. I think, but does it matter? If we scroll them up, does it really matter? No. These are spaces with which there is no identification or sense of personal attachment, but only formal contractual recognition of the individual permitted access. There is no social connection or sense of solidarity with others, but only an overwhelming sense of solitude. This is Augé's view. Even amidst the anonymous crowds who fill, queue, park, car parks, car lots, parking lots, another classic non-place. Even in the midst of the anonymous crowds who fill them, there is no sense of social solidarity or connection. They are spaces of a powerful and perpetual presentness rather than a sense of history. They are to be passed through or passed by as quickly and as efficiently as possible, circulation, if you like, to which no memories collective or individual pertain or adhere, wherein there is no accumulation of knowledge, loneliness, narcissism, boredom, born of empty time, are the corollaries and characteristics of time spent in non-places. This is my favourite. I drive past this every day on my way to work. Fulton's service station, beautiful concrete roofless structure on the M6 motorway just south of Lancaster. What a sight for sore eyes, what a sore sight for eyes. Augé, one of the interesting things about these non-places, of course, is, for me, because they are sites of boredom, perhaps we could talk about this, they actually become sites of kind of media use in various ways. And we might want to think about these sites actually as intensely media-saturated spaces to fill up that sense of boredom, to fill up that sense of loneliness. Augé recognises, though, that these places are types or ideals and they don't really exist in the real world as such. They are tendencies rather than absolute categories. He writes, place and non-place are rather like opposed polarities. The first is never completely erased, the second never totally completed. They are like palimpsests on which the scrambled game of identity and relations is ceaselessly rewritten. But non-places are the real measure of our time. Now, it would seem on the basis of this that the urban subway system, connecting the things you talking about, Douglas, the urban subway system would be an exemplary instance of a non-place. Here's Paris subway system close up with the central zone. That this is not the case for Augé is both surprising and instructive. Now, I'm going to cut most of his argument here, but just suffice to say that in two studies of his beloved Paris metro system from 1986, from 2015, the lines and stations which comprise it, the map itself, to start off with, is imbued with memories both individual and collective, as toponyms, as sites of recollection, as spaces of encounters. And we can see these kind of dots and points form a kind of, if you can imagine a series of dots and points which speak to us, form a kind of constellation, if you like, in his way. He would see this map differently from the way I see it. I see it as non-places. He would see it as sites imbued with particular meanings. This is where I met so-and-so. This is where I encountered so-and-so. This is where I used to get off. This is where I used to go to work. Metro system is also a site of experience and learning, he says, particular forms of habitus within the system, and particular ways of acting and being, particular forms of knowledge that are brought into being, how to find a place to stand, where the doors are going to open, which escalators to take, etc., etc. It's not a non-place because it involves experience and it involves memory. And thereby, Augé opens up two, perhaps several cans of worms at the same time. The first can of worms, I'm calling it number one can of worms, is that it seems that what is and what is not a non-place, what is or what is not a place, is utterly idiosyncratic and highly contingent. One person's non-place is another's place. The airport, for example, is almost certainly a place for someone who works there. Moreover, non-places can become places as a result of particular events and incidents. And what we've seen in America over the last few weeks is actually how airports have become very interesting spaces of activism, protest, demonstrations, etc. The ultimate non-place becomes suddenly a place of political and collective action. So we've seen that every non-place is also a potential place. Yeah. Place then kind of haunts non-places as its potential other. It's a kind of doppelganger in that sense. Secondly, and this is sort of can of worms number two, this is a kind of logical problem, is it not the case that by very identifying them as non-places, Augé draws our interest to them? He makes these places interesting for us. He makes airports interesting. He makes the most dullest, boring, time-wasting places that we can imagine actually places of interest to us, sociological interest, architectural interest. A number of studies of shopping malls, for instance, is hugely burgeoned in the last 20 years, for instance, as interest develops. Augé discloses the non-places of the cityscape and in so doing transforms them into places worthy of attention. One wonders then, can non-places resist all the significance being conferred upon them and importance bestowed upon them by the very person who first discovered them? In discovering them, he destroys them at the same time. They're like kind of the new angel in that sense. They appear and vanish in the same moment, singing very briefly one song. non-places cannot survive the attribution of meaningfulness. They are fated to take their place, however unwillingly, among the places of the city. And so, number 1 and number 2 St. Michael's have become places despite themselves. And perhaps me mentioning them today, drawing your attention to them, I have accidentally transformed them into places. And if this is so, I can only apologise, because that was never my intention. Lieux de mémoire, sites of memory, sound like very promising antidotes to the contagion of non-places in the contemporary city. But Nora's invocation and inventory of these sites is more critical, more complex, and certainly more pessimistic than one might initially suppose. Indeed, the term is something of a misnomer. Actually, it's a double misnomer. Firstly, it's a misnomer because the notion of lieu, of sites, of places, does not necessarily, and usually doesn't, refer to geographical or topographical places, physical or even virtual locations. Sometimes it does. Here's a little group: Lascaux, the Eiffel Tower, Versailles, the commemorative memorial at Verdun, Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader, Joan of Arc. Sometimes it refers to physical places. The Louvre, Parisian cafes, street names, Reims, and others. Often, though, the term lieu is used figuratively to refer to what he terms as singularities. So, a text, a song, the Marseillaise, a piece of music, famous personages. Here's a few other lieux de mémoire. Actually, he doesn't mention Delacroix, but I just threw that in anyway because I like the picture. Snails, okay, it's a cliche, right? But anyway, snail, French gastronomy, the Tour de France, Marcel Proust. These are also lieux de mémoire as well. So, Nora's lieux de mémoire are actually, in fact, not places for the most part. They are not sites. So the word lieu is a misnomer. De mémoire is also a misnomer because they're not actually sites of memory either, or rather, memory only of a very particular kind. Nora's concern is with what collective memory in France and how it is constructed and directed towards the work of state formation and building, creating both a national French history and identity. It is absolutely not about the work of individual memory, but rather about the collaborative production of memory by institutions, discourses, texts, practices, images, and symbols. Its coordination and co-option by the state. So just as these lieux are not sites, so these memories are not really memories. In actual fact, the proliferation of lieux de mémoire is characteristic of the very disappearance of memory, the absence of memory, amnesia. And he writes, this is kind of at the start of the project. I'll just read it out to you. We speak so much of memory because there is so little of it left. Our interest in lieux de mémoire, where memory crystallizes and secretes itself, has occurred at a particular historical moment, a turning point where consciousness of a break with the past is bound up with the sense that memory has been torn, but torn in a way as to pose the problem of the embodiment of memory in certain sites where a sense of historical continuity persists. These are lieux de mémoire, sites of memory, because there are no longer milieux de mémoire, real environments of memory. In other words, as memory disappears, it is reconstructed and recreated in these kinds of lieux, these kinds of mythologies is another term we could use for them. We live, for Nora, then, in hopelessly forgetful modern societies, he states. Ones in which, in fact, we've even forgotten how to remember. Lieux de mémoire, then, are the artificial prompts of memory deployed to promote a particular understanding of the past. In a society, Nora says, in which there was a direct and unbroken sense of continuity, of a connectedness to the past and to each other, where genuine environments of memory persisted, family, neighbourhood, community, class, civil society, civic associations, such mnemonics would be superfluous and seen through as externally imposed artefacts. Lieux de mémoire, he writes, are, quote, moments of history torn away from the movement of history, then returned, no longer quite life, nor yet death, like shells on the shore where the living sea of memory has receded. I love that. Shells on the shore where the sea of living memory has receded. In fact, Nora's great historical collection itself is a kind of whole, what we might call a kind of marine menagerie of washed up crustaceans. And now, as empty shells, these then provide dwellings for new occupants, like little hermit crabs, happy to accommodate themselves in and with these tiny vacant chambers and cavities, soft-bodied colonizers called academicians and advocates and agents of the nation state. Lieux de mémoire, then, are an assortment of leftovers, the remnants, bric-a-brac, curios, dusted off and proclaimed venerable antiques under the rubric heritage. It is here that one can begin to appreciate how the lieux de mémoire are not the antitheses of non-lieux, but their corollaries and confederates. Lieux de mémoire are really as empty of memory as non-lieux are bereft of meaning. Over here, non-places multiply, severing any connection between the self and place, producing the atomized, alienated individual as passenger, as commuter, as consumer, everywhere as stranger, always as isolate, without isolation. Over there, sites of memory reincorporate this de-individualized individual into the mass and the mythology of the nation, the approved rhythms and recitations of the regime. The superabundance of signs in non-lieu ensures the choreography of mass movement, spatial orientation, circulation, as you described it earlier. The state-sponsored symbols of the lieu de mémoire provide for the orchestration of memory, temporal orientation. And in supermodernity, one exists at the precise intersection of these two coordinates. In Manchester, no. There we go. In Manchester, the choice seems to be between fantasy footballers or historic England, or worst of both worlds, a hybrid of the two, a cityscape composed of corporate towers set amid conservation areas, stranded empty seashells for everyone. So I want to try and find a space that is different from these, or talk about a space that might be different from these. I don't know where it is, but I'm going to try and talk about it anyway. Let us try and consider something else, somewhere else, which might serve as sites of critique and counterpoint. Those places that attend to and bear the traces of the repressed and the oppressed, the downtrodden, the unsuccessful, the colonised, places which attend to the counter-narratives of those manifold others written out of conventional orthodox history, absent from the sites of memory. Indeed, it is precisely such places that these kinds of lieux seek to eradicate and erase. But they nevertheless remain as vestiges and residues. They survive as ghosts, linger as absent presences and present absences. And this returns us perhaps surprisingly to Augé. Significantly, his 1986 study In the Metro, Dans le Métro, opens with a memory, a recollection of a spectral figure of catastrophe. Quote, the first German soldier I remember seeing was at Maubert Mutualité, which I think is kind of there somewhere-ish. Until then, the Germans had only been an immaterial and diffuse presence, imposing endless shifts and revisions on our itinerary. We fled ceaselessly, but they were always ahead of us, except for an airplane. No sign was apparent of a progression that nonetheless everyone was talking about. It was a blurred absence, an abstraction forever on the point of materialising, which happened only on the morning of the return, at the Maubert exit, at the square that was being crossed by the hurried silhouette of a man wearing a grey soldier's cap. The exodus and itinerary which Augé is talking about here is his time in 1940 when, as a child, he and his mother left Paris before the advancing German army, searching for their father who'd been mobilised in a camp near Le Mans. And he returns to these moments as a refugee in his 2007 book, Casablanca, Movies and Memory, a study which opens and closes with a visit to his favourite little independent cinema on the Latin Quarter, the Action Christine, where the programme typically consists of Hollywood classics, art house movies and retrospectives, all the kind of cinemas we all go to, or would like to go to, or dream of in Paris. As he settles himself in his seat, and likes to go down for another viewing of Michael Curtiz's classic melodrama from 1942, the eponymous Casablanca, one might think that he is there to bask in an evening of nostalgia, sentiment, etc., etc. But the film is anything but easy viewing for him, because the memories occasioned by the film are certainly not consoling or comforting. The trials and tribulations of Rick and Ilse and their flight from Paris before the Wehrmacht recall his own traumatic childhood experiences of displacement. Casablanca itself was briefly home to his uncle and aunt, the former a dubious figure turned dashing war hero, whose celebrated return home was overshadowed by the death of his pregnant wife from pneumonia, a figure of grief and death, he says. And North Africa itself, even the fanciful representations of it fabricated in the film studios of Hollywood, remind Augé of his own national service there during the Algerian War of Independence. Invasion, fear, dislocation, death, the violence and brutality of war and colonialism. These are the memories that fill the Action Christine. Casablanca and the cinema in which it is seen are non-lieux de memoire, but loci of an altogether different kind, spaces of wounding by an unresolved and unhealed past, of haunting by the unquiet dead. I'd like to suggest two terms to capture these places. One, borrowing its nomenclature from Roland Barthes, the other from Walter Benjamin. In his own personal work of Mourning, Camera Lucida, Barthes famously ponders the essence of photography, its nome as he terms it, in the light of his discovering an image of his late mother as a young girl, aged 10, wearing a white dress, standing in the winter garden photograph, as it's termed. While most images one sees and passes over the subject of a disinterested, dispassionate gaze, studium, Barthes muses, others, and this image in particular, have a powerful and profound impact, occasioning a veritable visual shock to the spectator, disturbing and distressing the viewer. This, the wounding of the present by an image of the past, by the recognisable portrait of the then living, but now dead, by a catastrophe that was then still long in the future, which is now lies in our recent past, he famously terms the punctum. And so my suggestion is that the city must be recognised as places precisely of such painful and provocative encounters and recollections, ones which have pierced and punctured us, ones which remain as our wounds, sore points, scabs, scars. Places are urban puncta. Michel de Certeau writes, places are fragmentary and inward-turning histories. Past others are not allowed to read. Accumulated times that can be unfolded, but like stories held in reserve, remaining in an enigmatic state. Symbolizations encysted in the pain or pleasure of the body. A city of non-lieux and lieux de mémoire is a cityscape of the studium. It is of no interest. The idea of the city as a gathering of ghosts, as a haunted setting, brings us at last, long last, you're probably thinking, God, get on with it, Graeme, to the notion of Phantasmagoria, Benjamin's notion of Phantasmagoria, literally the gathering of ghosts in the marketplace. Hitherto, following Benjamin's usage in the Arcades project, this term has tended to be used negatively to refer to the deceptive and duplicitous features of capitalism, commodity fetishism, fashion, spectacle, monumentalism, dream houses, simulations, myth of progress, ideology. Put simply, Phantasmagoria refers to forms of illusion and enhancement in the service of domination and exploitation. Number one and number two, St. Michael's, would surely be exemplary of Phantasmagoria in this sense. And so I'm going to add both non-places and sites of memory to the list of phantasmagoria in the city. But I think there may be an alternative way of thinking about the gathering of ghosts in the city. Indeed, much has been written in recent years regarding such phantoms and the possibility of a critical hauntology, from Lefebvre, Derrida, Avery Gordon, Mark Fisher, etc. These writings tend to point in two directions. Firstly, to a preoccupation with the voices of the past that have been silenced, and the presence of those who have disappeared or been displaced or misplaced, with the unremembered and unworn dead, with the unheeded, unwritten, unacknowledged tradition of the oppressed, as Benjamin puts it. And secondly, to those hopes and aspirations for alternative ways of being and acting, for different futures which are possible, latent, imaginable, but which will perhaps never be realised, or at least a kind of Blockian not yet realised. Utopian aspirations and potentialities, not so much ghosts as wish images, dreams, visions of the virtual. We are haunted by, as Derrida puts it, the ghosts of those who are not yet born or who are already dead. We are shadowed by the shades of what was and stalked by the doppelganger of what could be. We must recover these twin spirits. What I am advocating then is that we rethink the notion of phantasmagoria as a welcome gathering of ghosts, as an invitation to spectres and spirits that are the bad conscience of the contemporary city, the return of the repressed and the oppressed, to those who will not be silenced, to those who refuse to go quietly into that quiet earth. Not non-places, not places of memory, but rather what we might term lieux de hante, or lieux d'hante, or more simply, les haunts. I'm going to advocate the term haunts, both an action and a place. A haunt is a setting which one frequents, to which one is drawn, to which one returns again and again. The living have their haunts. Indeed, as de Certeau insists, haunted places are the only ones people can live in. And surely this is precisely what Augé's various writings on Paris form. They are a series of eulogies or elegies to his own haunts, the Metro, the little independent left bank cinema, the familiar street corner bistro. Ask me, who am I? Who do I haunt? Who am I the bad conscience of? Who wants to get rid of me? Who would like to exorcise me? That's who I am. Who am I the doppelganger, the double of, the nuisance, the poltergeist? To remember and redeem these ghosts is not idle. It is so that we may free ourselves from them by laying them to rest, so that they may find peace, because only then may we find peace. True. But then again, there are different kinds of ghosts. Here I must confess that the notion of haunting itself troubles me, haunts me, we might say. I worry that it's all a little bit too wistful, all a little bit too quiet, all a little bit too peaceful. There are these sorrowful shades, these docile spirits. I would like my ghosts to be something else, something other, noisy, disruptive, disturbing, playful, causing trouble, up to no good, misbehaving, making a nuisance of themselves. Wild spirits, not weepy ones. My ghosts are those boisterous, unruly phantoms that are termed poltergeists. From the German, well, German is such a beautiful language, isn't it? To have a word like this, polten, to be noisy. Beautiful. Poltergeists. Let me finish by advocating, eulogizing the concept of phantasmagoria, understood as a gathering of poltergeists. These should be the riotous spirits of our times, the poltergeist as zeitgeist. What can one ask of you? I love the French, demander. What can I demand of you as architects? A new surrealism of the city, perhaps? Adieu to more non-places. Adieu to sites of memory. Instead, points of puncta. Instead, places for poltergeists. Instead, a cityscape of haunts. Instead, a city for the living. Thank you.